2 years after my divorce, life had finally become peaceful again. The pain my ex-wife left behind no longer controlled my thoughts every single day. I had spent months rebuilding myself after discovering her affair with a coworker she secretly met while I worked late shifts trying to provide for our future. At first, the betrayal destroyed me completely. I stopped talking to friends, avoided family gatherings, and spent endless nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone I trusted for 10 years could lie so easily. There were mornings when I couldn't even force myself out of bed because the weight in my chest felt unbearable. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of the marriage I thought would last forever. Her coffee mug still sat in the kitchen for months after she left, and sometimes I caught myself expecting to hear her footsteps coming down the hallway. The loneliness after divorce wasn't loud or dramatic like people imagine.
It was quiet. It lived in the silence of an empty house and in the habit of reaching for someone who was no longer there. But eventually, time forced me to move forward. I sold the old family house because every room reminded me of memories that no longer meant anything. Then, I moved into a smaller home in a quiet neighborhood outside the city where nobody knew my past. The house wasn't fancy. It had faded white walls, a tiny front porch, and an old oak tree leaning slightly over the driveway. But to me, it felt like a fresh start. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling surrounded by ghosts. My new life became simple. I worked during the day at a local repair garage and spent evenings fishing near the lake or watching old movies alone. It wasn't exciting, but it was calm. And after everything I had survived, calmness felt priceless. The garage owner, Mike, treated me fairly and never asked questions about my personal life. Most of my coworkers only knew I was divorced and preferred staying quiet. That suited me perfectly. I no longer had energy for explaining my pain to people who would never fully understand it. Every morning followed the same routine. I woke before sunrise, drank black coffee while listening to the weather forecast on the radio, and drove 20 minutes through empty roads to work. The predictability helped me heal. Some nights after work, I sat beside the lake for hours watching ripples move across the water while the sun disappeared behind the trees. Those moments gave me peace I hadn't felt in years. The neighbors around my small home were polite enough, though I kept mostly to myself. An elderly woman named Mrs. Collins sometimes waved while watering her flowers, and the man across the street occasionally invited me to weekend barbecues, but I usually declined. I wasn't ready to build close relationships again. Trust had become difficult for me after Melissa's betrayal. I convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking heartbreak another time. Slowly, the anger I carried began fading into numb acceptance. I stopped checking Melissa's social media accounts. I stopped wondering whether she regretted leaving me. I stopped caring. At least that's what I told myself every day. One rainy Thursday night, I came home exhausted from work. My clothes smelled like engine oil, and my shoulders ached from spending the entire afternoon repairing truck transmissions. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky while heavy rain hammered the streets. I parked in my driveway, sat inside the car for a moment listening to the storm, and felt strangely grateful for the quiet life I had built. Inside the house, I heated leftover pasta in the microwave, changed into old sweatpants, and collapsed onto the couch. The television played softly in the background while rain tapped against the windows like tiny fingers. For the first time in years, I remember thinking maybe my life was finally normal again. Maybe the worst chapter was truly over. Maybe I had finally escaped the chaos Melissa brought into my world. Then someone knocked on my front door. At first, I ignored it because nobody visited me that late. But the knocking returned, louder this time, echoing through the quiet house. Feeling annoyed more than worried, I walked toward the door and opened it slowly. The moment I saw two police officers standing beneath the porch light with serious expressions on their faces, a cold feeling spread through my chest. One of the officers looked directly at me and asked, "Are you Daniel Harper?" My stomach tightened instantly. "Yes," I answered carefully. The older officer removed his hat slightly and glanced at his partner before speaking again. "Sir, We need to ask you some questions about your ex-wife, Melissa. The second I heard her name, every bit of peace I had spent 2 years rebuilding suddenly disappeared. The officers stepped into my living room while rainwater dripped from their jackets onto the wooden floor. The house suddenly felt smaller, colder, and suffocating. Just minutes earlier, I had been sitting peacefully on my couch believing my old life was finally buried forever. Now, the past had somehow forced its way back through my front door. My heartbeat grew louder with every second as I watched the officers carefully study the room around them. One of them noticed the fishing gear near the hallway while the other glanced at the framed photographs on the shelf, most of which I had purposely kept generic so there were no reminders of Melissa anywhere inside the house. I could already feel anxiety tightening inside my chest because police officers never appear at someone's home late at night for harmless reasons, especially not carrying expressions that serious. I offered them coffee out of nervous habit, but both declined politely. The younger officer removed a small notebook from his pocket while the older one remained standing near the doorway with his arms folded. Then, after a long, uncomfortable silence, the older officer finally spoke. "Mr. Harper, your ex-wife has been missing for 6 days." For a moment, I honestly thought I heard him wrong. Missing? My mind immediately struggled to process the word because Melissa had disappeared from my life emotionally long before our divorce officially ended. Hearing that she had physically vanished now felt surreal. I stared at the officer, unable to react properly. "Missing?" I repeated quietly. He nodded once. "Her boyfriend reported her disappearance 3 days ago." Hearing the word boyfriend sent an old wave of bitterness through me, though I tried not to show it. The same man she left me for was now reporting her missing to police. Part of me wanted to laugh at the cruel irony of it all, but another part felt deeply unsettled. No matter how badly our marriage ended, I never truly wished harm on Melissa. I leaned against the arm of the couch, trying to steady myself. "Why are you here?" I finally asked. The older officer exchanged a glance with his partner before answering carefully. "Because your name appeared several times in her recent phone records." My confusion deepened instantly. "That's impossible," I said without hesitation. "I haven't spoken to Melissa in almost 2 years." The younger officer flipped through his notebook calmly. "According to our investigation, there were multiple calls connected to a number registered under your name." I shook my head immediately. "I changed my number after the divorce." The officers didn't accuse me directly, but I could feel suspicion lingering beneath every question they asked. It was the kind of careful politeness police use when they haven't decided whether someone is innocent or dangerous. The younger officer then placed several printed photographs onto my coffee table, one by one. Security camera images. In one picture, Melissa stood at a gas station wearing a dark coat and sunglasses. Another showed her leaving a grocery store carrying 2 shopping bags while nervously looking over her shoulder. The final image was grainy and taken at night inside an apartment parking lot. That picture made my stomach tighten immediately because beside Melissa stood a tall man wearing a dark hoodie. His face was blurry, but from a distance the build looked disturbingly similar to mine. "This image was captured 2 nights before she disappeared," the older officer explained. "Witnesses believe the individual may be you." "That's not me," I answered instantly, my voice sharper this time. The accusation angered me more than I expected. After everything Melissa had done to destroy my life, now I was somehow becoming part of a missing person investigation too. The older officer remained calm. "Can anyone confirm your whereabouts that evening?" I nodded quickly. "I was working overtime at the garage until almost midnight. My boss and coworkers can confirm it." The younger officer wrote down my response while the older one reached into a folder and removed more documents. "There's another issue," he said carefully. "Melissa recently withdrew $30,000 from a joint financial account originally connected to your marriage." My eyes widened in disbelief. "That account was supposed to be closed after the divorce." "Apparently it remained partially active," he replied. Suddenly, memories from the divorce flooded back into my mind. I remembered how emotionally exhausted I was during those months. Melissa handled most of the paperwork while I signed documents, just wanting the nightmare to end quickly. I barely read half the forms placed in front of me. At the time, all I wanted was freedom from the pain. Now I realized how careless I had been. The officer continued speaking while studying my reaction closely. We also discovered that 2 weeks before disappearing, Melissa privately reported feeling threatened by someone from her past. My chest tightened immediately because deep down I already knew what came next. "And she named me," I whispered bitterly. Neither officer answered directly, but their silence confirmed everything. Anger slowly burned through me. Even after cheating, lying, and destroying our marriage, Melissa had somehow managed to drag me back into her chaos once again. I explained my daily routine, my work schedule, and every detail that could prove I had nothing to do with her disappearance. The questioning lasted nearly an hour before the officers finally prepared to leave. But just before stepping out into the storm, the older officer paused at the doorway and looked back at me seriously. "One more thing, Mr. Harper," he said. "If your ex-wife contacts you for any reason, you need to call us immediately." Then both officers disappeared into the rainy night, leaving me standing alone in silence while the peaceful life I had spent 2 years rebuilding suddenly felt like it was collapsing all over again. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw police officers standing at my front door or Melissa's frightened face in those security camera photos spread across my coffee table. My peaceful routine completely disappeared. Even simple things started feeling strange and uncomfortable. When I drove to work in the mornings, I caught myself checking the rearview mirror constantly, convinced someone was following me. At the repair garage, I noticed coworkers lowering their voices whenever I walked past them. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe the police had asked more questions than my manager admitted. Either way, I could feel suspicion hanging around me like a shadow. My boss, Mike, eventually pulled me aside near the tool storage room and quietly asked if everything was all right. I told him it was just a misunderstanding involving my ex-wife, but even while saying the words, I realized how unbelievable my situation sounded. After work, I stopped going to the lake because I no longer felt relaxed anywhere. I spent evenings sitting alone in my dark living room with the television muted, while rain continued falling outside almost every night. Sleep became impossible. Every sound made me alert. Every car passing outside my house made me glance through the curtains. The life I had worked so hard to rebuild after my divorce was beginning to crumble all over again, and the worst part was knowing Melissa had caused it once more. Part of me hated her deeply for dragging me back into chaos after years of silence, but another part of me couldn't stop wondering if she was alive, terrified, or hiding somewhere alone. Despite everything she had done to me, I still remembered the woman I once loved before lies and betrayal destroyed us both. That conflict inside me became exhausting. I wanted to forget her forever, yet somehow she had returned to the center of my life without even being there. Then, late Sunday night, my phone rang from an unknown number. At first, I stared at the screen without answering. Very few people had my number, and after the police visit, every unexpected call made my nerves tighten instantly. The ringing stopped after several seconds, then started again almost immediately. Something about it felt wrong. Slowly, I picked up the phone and answered cautiously. "Hello." For several seconds, there was only silence and faint breathing on the other end. Then I heard a trembling voice I hadn't heard in years. "Daniel." My entire body froze. Even after all this time, I recognized Melissa's voice instantly. "Melissa," I whispered in disbelief. The moment she heard me say her name, she started crying softly. Not dramatic crying, but broken, exhausted sobs that sounded completely different from the confident woman who walked out of our marriage 2 years earlier. "You have to help me," she whispered desperately. Hearing those words ignited anger deep inside me. "Help you?" I snapped. "After everything you did to me?" She cried harder. "I know I don't deserve it," she admitted weakly, "but they're looking for me." My grip tightened around the phone. "Who's looking for you?" For a moment she hesitated as if terrified someone nearby might hear her speaking. Then she answered quietly, "My boyfriend, and some dangerous people he owes money to." I sat down slowly on the couch, trying to process what I was hearing. Melissa explained between shaky breaths that the man she left me for had secretly become involved with illegal gambling operations and financial scams shortly after they moved away together. Over time, he manipulated her into helping move stolen money through older bank accounts that appeared inactive, including the unfinished joint account connected to our marriage. Melissa claimed she didn't fully understand what was happening at first, but eventually realized dangerous people were involved. When large amounts of money suddenly disappeared, her boyfriend blamed her and told others she had stolen it. Afraid for her life, she ran away before they could find her. Then came the part that hurt me most. Melissa admitted she intentionally mentioned my name to police because she hoped suspicion would shift away from the real criminals chasing her. "I thought if they focused on you," she whispered shamefully, "they wouldn't focus on them." I closed my eyes in disbelief. Even now, after destroying our marriage and disappearing from my life, she had still used me to save herself. Before I could respond, I suddenly heard loud male voices shouting somewhere near her location. Melissa gasped in terror. Her breathing became frantic. "They found me," she whispered. Then the call disconnected instantly. For several seconds I sat frozen in silence, staring at the dark television screen across the room. My heart pounded violently while anger and fear collided inside my mind. Part of me wanted to throw the phone away and forget everything forever. Melissa had betrayed me, lied to police, and nearly ruined my life again. Walking away would have been easy, but deep down, I knew if I ignored that call and something happened to her, I would carry that guilt forever. So I grabbed my car keys and immediately called the police. Within minutes, officers traced the phone signal to an abandoned roadside motel outside the city. I drove there separately while police units surrounded the building under flashing red and blue lights. The entire area looked like something from a crime movie. Officers stormed several motel rooms and arrested Melissa's boyfriend along with 2 other men connected to illegal gambling and financial crimes. Melissa was discovered hiding inside a locked bathroom, trembling with fear, but alive. Days later, detectives confirmed I had absolutely no involvement in her disappearance or the stolen money investigation. My name was officially cleared. Reporters lost interest. Police stopped visiting my workplace. Slowly, the nightmare finally ended. A month later, I received one final letter from Melissa. Inside was a short handwritten apology admitting she destroyed the best thing in her life because of selfishness, greed, and lies. She wrote that leaving me was the biggest mistake she ever made. I read the letter once, folded it carefully, and burned it that same night in my backyard fire pit. Not because I hated her anymore, but because for the first time in years I was finally ready to let the past disappear forever.